Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. US brokered peace talks between Ukraine and Russia continue without much obvious movement on the key issues. Joining us is James Batchik. He's Associate Director at the Atlantic Council to examine Russia's proposed $12 trillion cooperation offers to Washington and the feasibility of a US-driven June peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia. Mr. Batchik, welcome to TVP World and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
So, $12 trillion, I mean, that's head-turning money. What have you heard about this offer by the Russians?
Well, you're right. That's certainly just an extraordinary amount of money. I have not seen the details of this proposed package, nor have I seen it be confirmed by either side. But this does fit with the larger pattern of the Russians, and particularly Kirill Dmitriev's push for promoting economic partnership as a means with the United States as a method of advancing the Russian position. I would just say that we should be skeptical of this $12 trillion figure that's attached to this plan. Even for the Trump administration, which certainly has a proclivity towards hyperbole, this is a wholly unrealistic figure, in my opinion. Russian nominal GDP last year was $2.5 trillion. This $12 trillion figure is more than 4 times that. And even U.S. nominal GDP was just a touch over $31 trillion. So it's really hard to imagine a deal that could reasonably count it up to 1/3 of the entire U.S. gross domestic product. So it just doesn't seem like a terribly feasible number. The number probably incorporates a good bit of trade and investment prospects, including gradually lifting some sanctions or longer-term economic projects between Russia and the United States. But do keep in mind that the largest trade and investment relationship in the world is right now between the United States and the European Union. And that's valued last year at $1.5 trillion. So, and the EU and US firms have around 4.5 trillion euros worth of investment in each other's markets. So a deal with the Russians accounting to $12 trillion is really just beyond imagination. And I would be very skeptical of whatever that deal is. I would imagine this is another effort of the Russian playbook to kind of continue on these negotiations, which have really not been leading to many sort of breakthroughs, and maybe even try to one up this plan that the United States has with the Ukrainians on this framework that's roughly $800 billion in economic support to rebuild Ukraine after the war. So I think we'll have to see where this goes, but I don't think there's much behind this plan, in all honesty.
Right, so not much to it, in your opinion. And I mean, you mentioned that the main, or potentially the main reason for the Russians doing this is simply to extend talks, the peace talks, and not come to any conclusion whatsoever. But they haven't shown any inclination to compromise in any way on the key issues. So, for example, the occupied areas, the Zaporizhia power plant, nuclear power plant, nothing. I mean, that is pretty obvious that they want to extend the peace talks. In fact, I don't think they're looking for peace at all. Would you agree?
I would completely agree with that completely. We saw not much breakthrough in the peace talks that occurred in Abu Dhabi. There was a prisoner exchange, which would certainly be celebrated. But then when you saw ideas of new talks happening in Miami between the United States, the Russians, and the Ukrainians, Dmitry Peskov said, no, there was no plans for the Russians to join. That certainly may change, but it just goes to show that the Russians are not really, in my opinion, negotiating in good faith or want to at all. Let's also keep in mind that when the U.S. position or U.S. idea for a infrastructure ceasefire last week was proposed, the Russians agreed and then backed out of it just hours or days later. They're currently bombing Ukraine's energy infrastructure during some of the coldest days of the year to really try to freeze out the Ukrainians. This seems to be like the Russians sticking to their maximalist points, like you said, of demanding total control of the Donbass, control of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, and also doing away with any sort of idea of security guarantees that the Europeans have been Europeans have been promising with the coalition of the willing.
So when is President Trump going to put some pressure on Russia? Because he doesn't seem to have done so. Well, certainly not directly. Perhaps indirectly in terms of the deal, the trade deal that he made with India, part of which was, to reduce purchases of energy from Russia. But in terms of direct pressure, as he's done with Ukraine, when is President Trump going to do that to Russia?
I think you're going to have to ask President Trump that question, but it is a good question to ask. President Trump has repeatedly at times said that he's angry at the Russians. That's what he stated earlier this year or last August. Was annoyed at Russian President Vladimir Putin for not wanting to negotiate. So we've seen flashes of these frustrations and sanctions on Russian energy providers, for example, in the past year. But it's never truly been a sustained pressure campaign on the Russians like we've seen on the Ukrainians. We've heard that with this new U.S. push to get to a peace deal by potentially June, there might be pressure on both sides. But in the past, we've seen a history of pressure on the Ukrainians and not really on the Russians. So we'll have to see. I think the only person who knows when he's going to put pressure on Vladimir Putin to end this war will be President Trump.
Well, you mentioned the encouragement, if you like, from President Trump to complete the peace deal by June of this year. Why June? Is there a political timetable you think he's keeping to?
Well, I mean, if you take what President Zelensky mentioned, there's a focus on the U.S. midterm elections, which I think certainly might be the case, and might be the administration looking for a win ahead of those midterm elections. However, we have also seen the administration put these timetables on there last August. They wanted a 2-week timetable. President Trump, famously said he's going to solve the deal or solve the war in 24 hours. His former Russia and Ukraine negotiator, Keith Kellogg, said it was going to be resolved in the first 100 days of the administration. So it's not new to see the administration put new pressure or timetable on the table for the negotiations. I think I would see this new potentially June schedule that they have to be part of that continued pattern.
Right, so it'll go by the way. Okay, now you mentioned the prisoner exchange. Just over 300 prisoners in total were exchanged between the sides. Is there any significance to this? Or is it a bit of a sop, really, to show that something has come out of the Abu Dhabi talks?
Well, I think it's always a positive development, and we should celebrate when there are prisoner exchanges. And I think both sides would certainly want to celebrate that. We saw President Zelensky celebrate the return of these Ukrainian soldiers. I think the administration wants to see this as a win in building the constructive dialogue that they hope can get to the larger questions. I, however, am skeptical that we would be able to solve those questions and those debates that still the Russians are maintaining their maximalist position on territorial integrity or control of the nuclear power plant or security guarantees. So I think that might be more of a ceiling than it is a bridge to further developments.
Right. So, as we've said on a number of times in this conversation, the Russians haven't budged on any of the key issues. What does Ukraine need? Because clearly security guarantees can only be implemented after peace has broken out. But what does Ukraine need to get to the stage where they force Russia into a ceasefire?
Well, you're right. That's the question is the right one. We need to be working on increasing the Ukrainians' capabilities to defeat the Russians on the battlefield so that the Russians feel pressure to come to the negotiating table and actually negotiate. That means increasing weapons transfers to the Ukrainians for the things that they need, in particular air defense to be able to secure their energy infrastructure right now. It also means support from the United States and the Europeans when it comes to keeping up the sanctions pressure on the Russians. The Europeans are tabling their 20th round of sanctions packages on the Russians to go after the Russian shadow fleet, Russian energy. They've asked to cooperate with the United States via the G7. That is an important part of the equation to really squeeze the Russians financially so they cannot keep filling their coffers, which eventually still just go to the front line. So the Ukrainians both need the military support, the political support from the West, and also that financial leverage to really focus the minds of the Russian negotiators to say we have to negotiate really, truly in good faith now.
Right. Well, I mean, the European countries have been saying this almost since the start of the full-scale invasion in 2022, but precious little has been done. I mean, Europe is still buying Russian energy. Hungary is an example, but there are other countries which are still buying Russian energy. There are frozen Russian assets in Belgium which are not being released for rebuilding Ukraine. How do we put pressure on these countries within the EU to actually do a bit more?
Well, my preferred option sitting here from Washington, D.C., would be have the administration put the pressure on the Europeans to demand more. We've seen those sort of demands come from the United States when it comes to Europeans defending themselves or having the means to be able to fight a conflict on European soil without American support. But what would really be an important move from this administration would be to pressure the Europeans to do more on exactly the issues that you raised, on pressuring countries, most importantly Hungary and Slovakia, to stop importing their energy from Russia. Still, they've received a carve out to continue to import Russian oil when they certainly don't need to, and the United States has, and President Trump has really let that happen. So that's the one thing that they can do. You also noted that there are still frozen assets sitting in Belgium and across Europe, and also the United States, I should add. There are some rumors that the administration didn't potentially want the Europeans to seize those assets, but it would make a big deal if the United States came out and said, yes, we should leverage those assets in the plan that the Europeans proposed, but was eventually shot down over disunity. But if the United States came in and say, we expect the Europeans to do that, we want the Europeans to step up, I think that would really be a action forcing mechanism on some of the countries that the United States holds particular sway over right now.
Right. Now, Ukraine has been quite dynamic, actually, in terms of finding innovative solutions. In this time, its level of awareness, knowledge of weaponry and military strategy has increased exponentially to the stage where it's a world leader in the production of drones, which it is now exporting. Tell us what you think of that strategy by Ukraine and how that could make a difference in terms of the relationship between Ukraine and the rest of Europe.
Well, I think it's a strong signal that Ukraine shows that they, one, have the expertise and the know-how to be able to deliver the most innovative solutions to the warfare as it's currently being fought right now. What we're seeing coming out of Ukraine on really a day-to-day, hour-by-hour basis is just round-the-clock innovation, and particularly when it comes to drones, but also the wider warfare as well. And I think what this shows is that the idea that the Europeans have to partner with the Ukrainians on co-production or intellectual property rights, and being able to have Ukraine access into the European market to really benefit, so Europe can really benefit both from Ukraine's know-how, but also from these materials themselves, is the right path to take. Ukraine also needs the capital in order to leverage some of this expertise. So there's a really give and take that can happen here, and it's a really positive sign, and it's much needed and very welcome.
Indeed. James Batchik of the Atlantic Council, thank you very much indeed for sharing your analysis with our audience. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye. Brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away. Lots more coming up. Goodbye.